And these lessons I've mainly learned in connection with fighting corruption. Because corruption is something where many people feel this is quite normal, in particular in a situation where there are no strong laws, where there are no courts, where there are no institutions to enforce honesty and integrity. In such situations, people think they have to fend for themselves and they have to do what is necessary. And this is exactly the situation in the globalized economy. The globalized economy has basically run out of control. The primacy of politics over the economy has been lost. And this is why we had to develop some ideas on how, in this situation, we could convince people to fight corruption, to understand how damaging corruption is to society, to individuals, to ethics. And I feel the situation is quite similar in the area of gender equity. The question of whether a society, whether a governance in a given society accepts the need to give equal opportunities, equal rights, equal attention to women and men. And therefore perhaps some of the lessons which I learned in fighting corruption are also applicable in the fight for gender equity, gender equality. And therefore perhaps here are some of the lessons I learned. One lesson I learned was that the source of strength of improving society, of creating reform for a better world, is civil society itself. It's the organized civil society in every country, in every situation. And this is what we use very much in connection with our fight against corruption. In other words, we empower civil society, in particular when they are organized in each country, to diagnose their own problem of corruption, to also see where the opportunities are for making changes, for building coalitions, powerful coalitions, perhaps with the government, with enlightened people in the government, with the private sector, because very often the private sector is at the same time the victim of corruption as they are the perpetrators of corruption. And then develop these reforms and monitor their implementation. I think the same thing should be done when it comes to the role of women. It should be civil society in each culture, in each tradition, in each social reality, which has to discover what the unfairness is and what the impracticality is and the economic damage and the personal damage and the ethical distortion which is created if you do not treat women fairly. The second point I learned when fighting corruption is that it is good to have a rather holistic approach, not to focus only on one tool, but to have a whole arsenal of different weapons dealing with corruption. So when you deal with corruption, you look at how the laws are, how the courts are, the independent, how the public procurement system works. Are there conflict of interests? Is there a disclosure requirement of political office bearers? Is there a possibility of protecting whistleblowers and so on? So there are hundreds of different elements which in their totality make up an integrity system. It is this holistic approach, systematic approach, systemic approach, which allows us to make progress in countries which have corruption problems, because they can see where the weaknesses and strengths of their civil society involvement may be. And I think it's very similar when it comes to gender issues, because you have to deal with education at a very early age. You have to deal with wrong values which are transported by the media, with stereotypes which are simply not suitable, with harmful traditions which are not really part of the culture, but rather rather they are protected by the people who are profiting from the status quo. So it is this holistic approach which is very important. And then I would say, most of all, one has to bring together the strength of civil society, building coalitions with various partners, and approach this in a patient, holistic, driving fashion. Then one can create a world in which women are properly recognized, as much as a world in which you can fight corruption and create integrity and openness and fairness and justice, not only for this generation but for future generations as well.